I just want to, first of all, thank you for organizing the conference, Massimo and Giovanni and all these other people. Thank you so much for inviting me here. And thank you also to my colleagues from Siena, because you introduced me to him. And so I'm happy to be back in Turkey. This is not my first time in Turkey. Okay, I came to Turkey in 1995, and I collected my dissertation data here. So I went to literally 17 cities all around Turkey, Kayseri and Izmir and Adana and all these different cities, and collected my dissertation data. I was in universities and in schools, and so I actually gave tests to 1,650 students in Turkey. So it was at that time considered a very large study. So I'm very happy to be back here again. Turkey is one of my favorite countries, and Istanbul, of course, is one of my favorite cities. In those days, I had black hair and a piccola pancia. I've always had the pancia, but it was more piccola. So today, what I would like to talk to you about is just these standardized tests, and so that was in the abstract. But I also want to extend that to classroom-based tests because I'm talking to teachers. I always say that we really need to talk to the ambassadors and the general, but they left now once we start talking about this. But this is who we really need to talk about, the people who really have the power. So today what I want to talk about is, I want to begin to discuss some responsibilities and risks that are associated with these exams, both in certification and classroom contexts. Then I'm going to define assessment, because I think we need to define it, and I'm going to broaden it. And then I'm going to focus on the exams and problematize these traditional assessments that we have, and the competencies that they measure. I think that's really a problem. And then I want to propose ways of reconsidering these exam constructs to reflect what we do in the real world. And then I'm going to propose a way of doing that, and then I'm going to give you an example at the very end of how we have been trying to solve this problem at Teachers College in Columbia in our language school. So first of all, what about these responsibilities and risks of these certification exams in large-scale, high-stakes contexts? So what is a language certification exam anyway? So a language certification exam is a procedure for providing score-based information that can be used by a public institution or authority, like the Ministry of Education, to attest in writing through the issuance of a certificate, by giving people a certificate. And the certificate says that an individual has achieved some acceptable level of language in some language competence needed to communicate in some domain of language use, or the certificate says the person has mastered a predetermined set of standards for some intended purpose or language use. So this is what that piece of paper means, okay? And so you see that these are the Italian certificates down here, that you know all those. So certification also has socio-political ramifications, right? So certification is a high-stakes, these are high-stakes tests of public accountability, since the scores from them are used to grant rewards or impose sanctions on people based on what they know or can do, and all of this comes in the service of some public policy goal, okay, to give people this certificate so we can do things. So the right the right to bestow these, let's go back. The right to give a certificate on individuals, to individuals for competence achieved is given to a reputable public institution or authority, like the Ministry of Education or Siena's University. And these certificates then function, or are interpreted, as a powerful symbol in society of fair, just, and equitable decision-making, where merit and not patronage is rewarded. So certificates are sponsored by a reputable public institution in order to be able to bolster trust in what these papers mean. Okay. So we all know this. So What is on these tests, though? So the second foreign language certification exams are taken by individuals for having achieved these competencies through many pathways. The content, what is on the exam, is not based on a specific program of study usually. Okay? It's often based on three things. One is success in an assumed future domain of language use, on tasks an individual might need to perform. That's one thing where we get the content. Another one is assumed content that examinees might need to communicate, for example, in the medical profession, with family, and then examining attributes. This is the most typical one. You needed to complete the task, like second language knowledge, or second foreign language knowledge, or topical knowledge in a biology test, things like that. However, the right to award these certificates comes along with a lot of responsibility. Okay? And the responsibility to ensure that the exam is theoretically meaningful. In other words, that score actually means something. It's psychometrically sound. In other words, the numbers are what they're supposed to be. And more importantly for society, it's a fair and just measure of the knowledge, skills, and abilities, and I'll use those KSAs in the talk, that the exam claims to be measuring. Okay. To justify these claims, though, a rigorous program of validation needs to be established. Okay. One that's aligned with these recognized validity standards. And the public trust requires that the validity evidence be transparent and available for external scrutiny. Okay. So everybody who creates these exams, who charges people money for them, need to have this kind of validation evidence. Okay. In the case of the Italian chills, for example, the one you guys know, this would require validity evidence for the assumption that, one, the B1 exam provides a theoretically meaningful and psychometrically sound measure of the examinee's ability to communicate in Italian by performing tasks similar to those they might encounter in the real world at the B1 level of proficiency. Okay. And this study would be a predictive validity or construct validity study. Another claim on the test would be the B1 exam has accurate cut scores that can be used to differentiate mastery from non-mastery of the required competencies. And this would require a study as a standard setting study. Or the third one is the B1 exam scores can generalize across groups of examinees, equivalent tasks from one year to another year, across different occasions. In other words, evidence that the differences in scores are based mainly on a student's competence and not necessarily on things like gender or socioeconomic status, etc. And we would need a diff study to do that, to provide that evidence. So the right to reward certificates comes with serious risks that could cost the issuing institution loss of trust in the public's eyes or loss of financial benefit if the accuracy of the scores should be called into question for some reason, like what happened recently, a couple years ago, with the TOEFL in the United Kingdom. So in order to mitigate these factors, these risks, we need to establish a rigorous program of validation. So you could fight this in courts. Okay? A plan for periodic updating of the exam, and a program to identify risk, actually. Assess it and take steps to reduce it to an acceptable level. There will always be risks when we have these high-stakes exams. So what are some takeaways from this part? So language certification exams produce scores that are used to make high-stakes decisions about examinees in the real world. These decisions can serve as gatekeepers or as gate openers, actually. They also open gates for people. As a result, the public needs meaningful and trustworthy assessments that can accurately predict how learners are likely to perform given their level of competence. So now you need to think about your exams and do they do this? Okay. Certification exams must be defensible, not only in terms of their psychometric qualities, but also in terms of their interpretive meaningfulness. In other words, what does that score B1 actually mean in the real world? Okay. I would argue that exams as quality products of sale that cost students money also need to be theoretically current, up to date, and if possibly, innovative and fun. Come on, let's make these exams, put some jazz into these exams, okay? So today I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But now let's go on to classroom-based assessment. So what about classroom assessments? Do we need to certify that these exams are meaningful and consistent? What are the responsibilities and risks of using classroom assessments? Okay? And so here, when most teachers think of assessment, they think of formal tests administered both inside the classroom, like quizzes and unit tests, and outside the classroom, like these certification exams. They also think of evaluation, with grades, okay? They don't necessarily think of practice activities as an assessment in classrooms. No grade, but still evaluation, right? Or assessments that are embedded in instruction and mediated through interaction. For example, when you're teaching, it's an ongoing question-response feedback sequence. No grade, but definitely evaluation. We are evaluating how our students are performing when they're using the past tense wrong. Okay. So if you look at this, you have two types of assessments. Assessments inside the class or external to the classroom, which you already know, these standardized tests, and assessments internal to the classroom. And I could give an entire, I give an entire semester course on that. Okay? And so I'm going to just break it down here for you here, just to give you a little flavor. So inside the classroom, we still use tests. And these are formal tests. They give grades and all that stuff. So they're a little bit different from the other tests. But the goal of these tests, theoretically, are to provide feedback to students, right? So they're designed for learning, actually. So you give a test, and often you don't go over the results, so people get no information. Or there's static feedback. You just give them the correct answers. Or there's actually the co-construction of knowledge through interaction, where you work through the information with them and you help them learn more, okay? Also in class, what often teachers do not think of as a test is a practice activity. For me, that's a test. That is a test, okay? These practice activities are embedded in instruction, and they're usually in the textbook or some kind of workbook or some supplemental stuff. And the idea here is for learning purposes, often to give some feedback. Okay? When you can, no feedback is feedback, it's static or interaction. And then a third type of assessment in the classroom, which is probably 90% of the assessments in the classroom, are spontaneous assessments. This is where you're talking about something and you hear something, okay, and you hear a mistake, and you decide what to do with it. Okay, so this is embedded in instruction. So you can either, you hear the mistake, you can give them a question, you can say, oh, really? Or, you know, you can say something, do a recast, or you can decide to give them some assistance, you can scaffold that assistance, you could go through the sequence of, questioning, giving them help, etc. It's a whole sequence here. And that's a kind of certification when you do that. Again, I don't have time to go through this, but this is a super interesting area here. And this is what my book is on. A lot of this is what my book is on. Or you can do kinds of spontaneous assessments in talk. So you're in the hallway, you're talking to your student, you hear they use the past tense wrong, you notice it, there's an evaluation. If there's a communication error, if you really don't understand, then you have to do some clarification with them. That's all assessment. And we teachers keep that in our head. I spent 2 weeks with the past tense and they still don't know it. Okay? But those are assessments. So these assessments are designed with reference to the curriculum or standards. They elicit the display of second and foreign language knowledge, skills, and abilities with development in mind. And we think about this in terms of instruction that we give to them after this assessment. Assistance, development is often, all of these are often part of the conceptual design of these types of assessments. Unfortunately, the world, when we think of assessment, we forget all about this, and we just look at this, okay, in classrooms. I'm going to focus on this today. I'm going to focus on, I don't have time to focus on that because I have a lot to say just about the actual tests. So what is an assessment? An assessment refers to the process of collecting data about a person's knowledge, skills, and abilities for the purpose of making claims or inferences and interpretations about examinees' attributes. And we use these inferences to make informed decisions that are theoretically intended to provide beneficence, to do good for all stakeholders. This is really what an assessment person thinks an assessment is. Okay, so how does this apply? So in large-scale assessment settings, we can think of assessment as the collection of data, typically scores, from which we can make inferences about those scores or interpretations, and usually about the examinee's knowledge, skills, and abilities. In other words, a high score, high proficiency. Okay. So these inferences that they allow us to make decisions about placement, proficiency, certification on the large-scale exams, and these decisions have consequences. Okay? In other words, you need to give the right people, the right people the rewards. You don't want to give the people who don't know things the rewards. Okay? And these consequences are intended to benefit the stakeholders. So in society where we have a meritocracy, we want to give people, we want to reward people who do well. Okay? So these have social ramifications. In the classroom, and so the chain of thinking is you get data, that's your evidence, you interpret the data, those make inferences about that, that's a kind of evaluation. You take that inference, you make a decision, and hopefully those decisions are going to have beneficial consequences. Okay. That's a normal test. In a classroom setting, though, it's a little bit different. It's more complex. Assessments refer, again, to a collection of data, but this time it's scores. It might be observations of performance, okay, from which we make inferences, again, or interpretations, usually about an examinee's knowledge, skills, and abilities. So good performance in class means has learned. A good mistake means is still learning, right? It's the type of inference we have. So these inferences are used to make decisions. We can hear the mistake and decide, I'm not going to do anything. Okay? We often do. Or we can say, good. We can praise. Or we can provide assistance, and we can provide feedback. Or we can decide, okay, I got to reteach this. Okay? So these are kinds of decisions that we make. So the decision often leads to assistance, feedback, or instruction, after which there is a follow-through assessment to determine if these learning gaps have been closed, and that's where the beneficence comes through. And so this is not just getting the information, but it's doing something about it. And so we call this an assessment event. So it's more than assessment, because there are multiple things that happen here in the classroom. Okay? So if you compare the two types of assessments, in the large-scale assessment, it's, data, make inferences, make decisions, basta così. Right? But in the classroom, it's not basta così. It's, che faccio? Okay, I got to do something with this. I make decisions, do nothing. I got to reteach. It's a lot more complex. And unfortunately, we have not, as a field, studied this part. We've studied this part because this is where the money is, up here. Okay? All right. So in large-scale testing context, we certify exams related to a student's ability to communicate. These claims are used by stakeholders to make decisions about, for example, placement, entry, workplace readiness, etc. And so in classroom context, we use tests and other assessments to certify claims related to the examiner's ability. So here are some claims that we usually make. The ability to assess, access, and use prior knowledge to learn in class. We do use that. Okay? It's not usually formal. It could be more formal. Okay? We make claims about whether students are able to build new knowledge by processing input, giving them a reading. Can you build new knowledge by that? We make claims about once we've taught them something, can they consolidate or internalize these new understandings? We make those claims all the time. And then we say, well, can you share these new understandings through talk or through writing something, through text? We ask them to share it. We ask them to display, speaking and writing. And then what we don't usually do, but we wish we did, is to apply these new understandings to different or novel contexts. That transfer of learning. So you teach the past tense in this context, can they use the past tense in that context? We don't normally do that, but we should. So, my question, for this part. Is it important to certify claims that students have built and consolidated new understandings in classrooms? Or claims that students can share these understandings and can apply them in novel contexts? Well, you know the answer already. It's absolutely yes. But we probably need to, since it's involved with learning, we probably need to use a learning-oriented assessment approach to this, where learning, assessment, and instruction are intrinsically related and inseparable in many ways. We haven't conceptualized this way. So this is brand new. Okay. It's not actually brand new, but there's new literature on it. So the risks, think about the risks of not certifying learning and achievement claims results in the lack of accountability regarding learner processing and incremental development. Lack of accountability regarding learning outcomes. Lack of accountability regarding learner dispositions. How do learners feel? Okay. Unequal opportunities to learn from instruction. These are ethical concerns if you don't certify this. A non-competitive workforce in society. This is a socioeconomic risk that we have in education. Or actually a loss of trust in schooling. Political ramifications. I mean, you're getting this whole thing now with populism in the United States. A lack of trust in schooling, a lack of trust in intellectuals, a lack of trust in anything that's academic. Interesting. So how do we certify these claims in classrooms? So imagine that students have begun a unit on dinosaurs. The past modal forms are identified as linguistic resources for expressing uncertainty or speculation about the disappearance of dinosaurs. They might have done this, they might have done that, this could have happened, that might have happened, right? We use those. All right, so how do you get the information? Well, the assessment claim is that students can identify the past modal forms and understand how these forms are used to convey speculation. This is a receptive skill. Okay? The method we use is a multiple choice test. Okay? And then the scoring method is right-wrong scoring, where the wrong answer gets 0 and the right answer gets 1. And so then we have a whole series of interpretations from the data we get, decisions that we get, feedback that we could make, and then follow through that we could actually give as a second test. How does this work in a different type of test, or a different claim? Students have learned to use the past modal forms to speculate about the disappearance of dinosaurs again. Now students are asked to use the past modals to speculate about a crime. Okay? Transfer of learning. So it might have been, it could have been, it must have been the butler. You understand? So whether they would transfer this learning. So what kind of assessment? Well, the assessment claim would be students can use the past modals to speculate in any relevant context of language use. This is a very strong claim. This method is an extended production task. So when given information about a crime, students can summarize evidence and speculate about the findings in a report delivered in a simulated courtroom. Okay? And the scoring method would be a content-responsible rubric where content is scored, as well as language. These are new types of rubrics that people are coming up with. And then again, you get the results. There's interpretation, decisions, feedback, and follow-through in the classroom context. So what are the takeaways from this? Classrooms produce scores or observations that are used to make decisions about examinees, just like in large-scale assessments. Decisions about learning, in my important, are always high stakes. Think about it. Your kids aren't learning, okay? No parent wants that. Okay? This is our responsibility to make them learn. So we need the evidence to be able to do that. Students need trustworthy classroom assessments that can accurately inform them about their performance. If students don't meet the mark, then they actually have the right to empirically derived information on what to improve. Not just your ideas, but the empirical information. Some evidence here. They also have the right to appropriate interventions, your teaching, okay? So they can demonstrate that they've closed those learning gaps. This is the follow-through, that's the certification in a classroom-based test. Okay. These assessments also need to be defensible in terms of theoretical meaningfulness and psychometric qualities like fairness in scoring and things like that. Okay. So standardized tests basically use one method of eliciting performance data from the students, and that's a test. In most instances, students display the knowledge, skills, and abilities by responding to a set of simple, independent skills tasks. That's basically what these standardized tests are like, okay? So they get reading, writing, listening, monologic speaking, grammar, and the interpretation of all of this accumulation as high scores equals high proficiency. Okay. However, these assessments are often criticized for being inauthentic. How do they measure the ability to access, build, and consolidate knowledge, and then share this knowledge? How do they measure transfer of learning? What role do instruction and learning play on those tests? In short, we might question whether the performance elicited by traditional tests resemble what students need to do with language in the real world. I do. Classroom-based tests are more complex than standardized ones. They use multiple methods for eliciting performance data. Also, besides requiring students to display their knowledge, skills, and abilities, classroom-based assessments are intended to affect learning and instruction. They require students to perform simple and often complex tasks in classroom-based tests, where both performance itself and the foundational skills that underlie that performance are evaluated. Sometimes classroom-based assessment tasks are independent, other times they're integrated. Classroom-based assessments use a variety of response types, depending on the assessment goal. They're not just stuck to the multiple choice test. And classroom-based assessments provide summative information that is often used for formative purposes. However, classroom-based tests are often criticized for being unsystematic, theoretically ungrounded, and psychometrically flawed. So, how can we marry these two things? Can this marriage be safe? Okay. So some thoughts. So how can we design assessments that are substantively meaningful, psychometrically sound, systematic in terms of delivery and evaluation, and authentic? How can we design assessments that measure students' performance on real-world tasks, as well as the components of those tasks, of the performance? Besides display on a test, where you display your reading ability, how can we design assessments that evaluate development of these skills? In other words, where you learn something while you're taking the test. Okay? And how can we look at students' amenability to receiving feedback? If a student doesn't want to receive feedback, they are not going to learn, I can guarantee you that. Okay? How can we design assessments to be engaging and fun? Okay? All right, to do this, let's consider some of the things we do in the real world. Okay? Have our exams, classroom and standardized, kept up to date. So here's the real world. And I got this really from the Organization for Economic and Cooperation and Development down here. They use the PISA test uses this. Okay? So let's look at what we do in the real world. So over the years, social, cultural, economic, political forces in education and in the workplace and in our daily lives have significantly increased the knowledge, skills, and abilities that we use as second language speakers. We do a lot more with this with this now. For example, one thing we do is social interpersonal domain of language. We talk with friends. Okay, we use language in that domain. We use it in the social transactional domain where we need to do something, like go to a pharmacist. We use it in academic, obviously, and in instructional domains. And we use it in occupational domains. We use our language. So here are some domains that I've identified. So one is the social interpersonal domain. We use it in social international context, in instructional or academic context. We use language now in occupational or professional contexts, in social persuasive contexts, like when we write an editorial or we want to pitch a new product to someone. We use it also in literary contexts. I never thought, when I was in Siena 2 years ago, I never thought that Pietro would ask me to read a poem in Italian. Okay? And I chose a Sicilian poem. So I had to read it in Sicilian and in Italian, but this is a literary context, and I had to like learn how to pronounce Sicilian. Okay, I'm doing this. So this was a literary domain of language use. Okay. When I say use the language, I mean the ability to express and understand a variety of meanings, not just the literal meanings, but the meanings that Pietro just was talking about. So within these domains, we need to be able to draw on language and topical resources. Your students, when they take that biology test in English, it's language and topical resources to perform simple and complex tasks. Now, for example, here are some things we need to do in real life. Establish and maintain relationships and collaborate in multicultural teams, and we often have to do this online. Carry out routine transactions in everyday settings, including those online. We need to process, interpret, and synthesize ideas, opinions, and feelings from various sources via multiple modalities so we can share this information with others, and so we can interact and collaborate with others to achieve specific goals. We need to engage with and process information. We do this all the time. Analyze it, categorize it, and critically evaluate it so we can reason from evidence. We look at the evidence, we learn, we invent, we solve problems, and we make decisions. We need to develop and display leadership skills, one that's not normally talked about, okay? And we need to develop engaged participatory practices, where we are a part of the conversation. We're not always just sitting there listening. Okay? We need to use technology to search for information, judge its accuracy, and evaluate its applicability for some goal. We need to seek out and profit from instructional assistance and feedback to learn and develop. We need to display positive cognitive, motivational, affective dispositions like focus, persistence, confidence, engagement. And we need to develop these towards learning and also towards our own performance. This is what we should be teaching. This is what we should be testing, right? This is the stuff. And we do all this in a second form language. Okay? So the question is, so how do our current exams address these types of competencies? So let's just take an example here, and I'm going to use this example for the rest of the talk. Okay? So here's a scenario, it's called collaborative problem solving. This is a task that your kids have to do when they take the PISA test. Okay? So here's an example, it's urban activism. Your social studies class has decided to join a community action group to help solve some unsightly problems around the city. Traffic, graffiti, etc. Your group's ultimate goal is to make a 3-minute video narration for viewing at the next city council's meeting. And your group will. Now remember, this is a test. They're doing all of this in a test. It's all coherent. Okay? It's built step by step. So one, they need to discuss city problems and select a few to focus on. They need to research the problem online and synthesize the takeaways, or summarize the takeaways. Then they need to synthesize all this information. They need to decide on some solutions. They need to prepare a presentation. They need to video record the presentation. And then they need to write a brief news clip about what they just did. This is what we should be preparing our students for, this type of stuff. So let's put this on a test, okay? Theoretically, what are we measuring here? The ability to decode, understand, interpret, and personally relate to, and critically reflect upon, and engage with written and spoken text within a topical content for some specific goal. We're also measuring the ability to incorporate information from multiple sources and disciplines to create synergies and consensus actions related to that specific same goal. The ability to utilize information from various spoken and written sources so we can learn and instruct and achieve those goals. The ability to use information to co-construct knowledge with the other people to solve the problems together. The ability to monitor and critically reflect on the topical information and make actions and provide feedback and give group and provide feedback to improve group and personal goals here. This is a lot to put on the test. How do we do this? Okay, this is what we should be testing here. Okay. All right, so if these are the competencies we need in the real world, why don't our current exams do this? Okay. So this urban activity activism activity presents a scenario, and I'm going to use scenarios here, with a carefully sequenced set of tasks that lead to a meaningful resolution of a problem. Okay? Examinees work alone or in virtual teams during the test. They access prior knowledge, build knowledge by reading and listening, consolidate this knowledge, and they share their understandings with each other. To solve the problem, they need to give and be amenable to assistance, feedback, or even instruction on a test. Just as we would expect in real-life context, and they need to manage their affective dispositions on a test. All right, so in order to move beyond the current models of assessment for certification or classroom-based tests, we need to broaden the construct here. Okay. So here's some ways of broadening the construct. So some things we need to put on this test. So to complete the urban activism task, examinees need to be able to draw on, of course, a range of semantic or grammatical resources. But they also need to draw on topical resources. They're learning about, about solving a problem in a city. Okay. They also need to engage sociocognitively with this. This is a problem-solving task. With tasks in which they are asked to build, consolidate, and share topical information. They need to engage with the topic. Engagement with the topic requires the ability to understand and express literal meanings and maybe even contextualize meanings. Okay? So that the examinees can argue convincingly in culturally appropriate ways. Construct. They need to, we shouldn't be thinking anymore about proficiency only in terms of linguistic accuracy. We need to think about proficiency in terms of being able to communicate ideas. So, most foreign language assessments, though, focus only on linguistic accuracy. And now that we have the Common European Framework, our new God, okay, Common European Framework, we're going to do some micro functions. And we give scores to those micro functions. We don't actually work in micro functions. That's like giving a multiple choice test. There's a cluster of functions. Look at the cluster of functions that I've just talked about here. We need to be looking at clusters. So I'm not a big fan of the Common European Framework for reference because of that. So oddly, scoring for these accurately and meaningful propositions that we come up with, these aren't scored for. Just the linguistic piece is scored for. In my view, this is problematic. Okay? So think about it. Many of the language tests give us information about an examinee's level of second language ability to perform a range of independent tasks within some relatively unspecified context. Now think about the Cambridge exam, or the TOEFL. I don't know whether you've taken these exams or not. So for example, you have a reading test. And you give it a reading passage 1, you answer questions, then reading passage 2, a completely different passage, answer questions, and then reading passage 3, and then you answer questions, and you're supposed to forget all that information. Okay? You don't need to do anything with that information. You just read, answer questions. 3 different patterns. This is what I call so is this really what we do? This is not really what we do. We don't bounce around like that. We read something, and we think about it, we talk to someone about it. We keep those things in our head. This is what I call read, respond, and forget what you read method of assessment. Okay? Really, it is. So do we want our scores to represent only independent traits? This would mean reading, listening, without speaking and writing. Okay? So here's some things where we do that. Okay? But within real life, do we speak and write without the expectation of some response? Well, maybe we can give a self-memo, right? Or we can write in a journal, we can give a speech. What we really, so what you have on these tests is you've got independent grammar, and then you've got several independent readings, and then you've got several independent listenings, and then all of this builds up to what we call proficiency, the accumulation of. Okay? Is this really what proficiency is, in my view? For me, it's not. This is more what proficiency is. Almost everything we do in real life involves some integration of skills and tasks. We speak, we listen, we read. We speak again. Or we speak, we listen, we speak, and we write. And we read, and we listen, and we write. Okay? They're all integrated. Okay? So if we claim our tests can provide information on what people know and can do in the real world, then we need to build our assessments to look like that. We need to have performance on the test task look like performance in real life. So when we work together to complete a project, we read and discuss and learn. The skills are integrated, and there are many steps in solving the problem. When we use language, we communicate information. The quality of the content of that information, not just the language, should be scored. When we communicate, we're often corrected. And we learn. Sometimes we're given assistance and we learn. So instruction and learning should be a part of the conceptual design of the test. So how do we do this? So let me give you one example of going forward with this. So what we've done at Columbia is we've tried to build what are called scenario-based assessments. They're based on scenarios. So theoretically, I'm going to talk to you quickly about theoretically what we're trying to do, and then I'll give you an example of this test. Okay? We're going to try to model it. So first of all, let's define scenario. Scenario is a description of an internally consistent set of naturally occurring imagined scenes or events in which characters carry out actions, kind of like in a narration, right? And they interact with each other until they bring the scenario goal to a conclusion. Okay, so you have a goal. Your group has a goal to meet. Okay? Given that scenarios are proxies for real-life situations, they're used to create a context in which engaged examinees use their mental resources and their affective dispositions to perform a set of carefully sequenced tasks to achieve this goal. So scenarios are naturally, this is what I love about them, they're naturally flexible in that they can present straightforward scripts. You go to the pharmacist, you buy something over. Or they can be manipulated in complex ways. For example, they can present storylines with surprising features, such as novel insights, shifts in values or perspectives, feedback, so forth. For example, so you go to the pharmacy in New York City, and you get a pharmacist who's a jerk. Okay? How do you deal with that linguistically? Okay, so you need to kind of change, and then they don't have your medicine. And then he's not going to tell you when you get the medicine. So you can add these things into the scenario to see how they're actually performing when you're giving something novel like this. That gets exciting, that's more fun. So similar to real life, just about anything can be modeled to create dynamic scenarios and therefore dynamic language use and dynamic thinking in these scenarios. Okay? So it's a technique used to present examinees with a relatively complex real-life, goal-oriented task to perform, like solving a problem. So one scenario that we use is this community campaign to make a difference. Okay, this is kind of like, I did this when I was giving a talk at Rossa. Okay. And so the context of the scenario requires examinees to engage in, display, develop, and coordinate a range of topical, linguistic, and cognitive resources to work collaboratively with others to learn and ultimately to solve the problem. Like, how are we going to fix this problem? Okay? My friend who wrote a letter to the mayor in Rome got nowhere. He wrote an article in the New York Times, and the mayor called him. Think about that. So the problem, unlike other assessments, is intended to be a worthwhile educational experience in its own right, with the expectation that examinees will actually want to solve the problem, will learn something while doing it, and will have the opportunity to receive assistance and feedback within the assessment. So scenario-based assessments can even be designed to offer examinees choice in how they, on what they want to talk about. They can choose from all of these different types of things to write to the mayor about. All right, so the problem is contextualized within a scenario that presents examinees with a coherent set of independent and integrated tasks as part of the scenario. And these tasks are designed to invoke processes, strategies, and habits of mind that people would use in solving these types of problems. Okay. So for example, if we take that urban activism task, these are some of the habits of mind that people would use in solving the problem. So each of these would be a task. Okay, you would measure each of those tasks. So the scenario transpires in a social context like we normally do, with the examinees as a contributing member of an imaginary group online. You have virtual members, and I'll show you in a second. As in real life, the team's social interaction can serve several purposes. You can help each other figure out what the problem is, you can give assistance to each other. There are all kinds of things that we do in the social context. Finally, scenario-based assessments, they use computers. So there's digital literacy involved in this, and you can measure that. So here's the example of a placement test that we've given at Columbia. where we try to design a scenario-based test. And I only have certain pieces of it for you. So first, so this is what the placement test looks like. So a student sits at the computer, they look at the screen, and this is the first screen that they see. And then they hit submit, begin there, in the beginning there, and it takes them to another screen, but this is not the screen it takes them to. This is just to give you a general idea of what we're trying to get at. So when they first sit down, since it's a placement test, there's a screening test. It's a grammar, old-fashioned grammar test that basically says you take the B2 test, the B1 test, the C2 test, so they know. You can't give people who are A1 a B2 test. So they're streamed into the test that they're supposed to take. Then we introduce them to the scenario. The group has to pitch an idea on an educational trip. So they need to choose between going to Vietnam and Jordan. Okay. So that's the goal here. So first we give them a background knowledge task, and then we give them a reading, so they can read about this. And then we give them feedback on their reading. So they give them a reading, they answer questions, and then we give them feedback on it. And then we help them with this. We give them some tasks to help them identify strengths and weaknesses. And then we model it. And then we make them write a summary. So that's a summary about Jordan. Or that's a summary about Vietnam. The next time we give them a listening task, and the listening task is about Jordan. And we make them ask questions, and we give them feedback on it. We give them their answers, okay? We correct their answers. And we give them another task, okay? Pros and cons. And then we don't give them any assistance this time, to see if they can learn from assistance. And then we ask them to write another summary. And then we ask them to synthesize the task. We choose between Vietnam and Jordan. And then we say, okay, now you need to speak. You need to do your 3-minute pitch to the group to see if you win. And then we say, we're going to give you that same background knowledge test here, so we can figure out if you actually learned something during the test. Because if you're going to solve a problem, you should learn something. You should learn vocabulary at least, right? Why? Are you here because I don't have very much time?
No, you just have some minutes.
Good, I can do this in 10 minutes. I can do it in 10 minutes. So, first we introduce them to the grammar section. And I didn't give you all the stuff here. So it's a screening test. So then they see a screen that says, let's begin. So then they see the screen here, tells them about the grammar section. And then we introduce them, we want to measure their background knowledge. In other words, we're talking about Jordan and Vietnam, so what do you know about Jordan and Vietnam? Okay? So typically what we're measuring here is vocabulary, and we're measuring topical knowledge. Did you learn something about these two countries? In the next screen, we introduce them to the project. Okay? So this is the teacher, and the teacher is saying, okay, first of all, I have some good news. Every year we take a class trip, but this year we got money to go abroad. Okay, and so, but you need to compete against this to find out where you're going. And so this is kind of it's a gamification of this. And the students actually like it, even adult students. Okay? So each group in the class will select 2 countries that interest you. You will then get information about these countries, and you'll compare the pros and the cons, and the pros and the cons. And notice we're teaching them vocabulary here. We're teaching them pros and cons, because this is a B1 level test. We don't assume they know it, we're going to test them on it. We're going to test them on it later on, see if they learn it. Then we introduce them to the virtual team. This is who you're going to be working with. You're going to be working with these other people. So this sounds difficult, but it's not. I'll help you with each step of it, and they're introduced to these 3 other people on the test. And then there's a peer chat. Automatically, the students immediately start chatting with each other, right, as you always do. As they always do, bang, 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 they're talking to each other, and so we have a chat function here. Okay? After the teacher gives them the assignment, the students kind of figure out what they have to do. They say, oh, we need to choose 2 countries. I think Vietnam is interesting. Me too. And what about Jordan? It's interesting too. Okay, but I don't know very much about the countries. Let's go online. Of course, go online. This generation, go online. Okay? Next time, so now they go online, and I've left out a lot of slides here, but you get the idea. So now we introduce them to the reading. Okay? So in this section, she's going to tell them about the reading. And then she's going to give them a reading test. Okay? So in this part here, we're going to try to, it's reading input. It's all about reading. So this is an online bulletin board And then there are some questions on the side here, so we can figure out if they've understood the reading or not. Okay? And then after that, we ask them to categorize. Well, actually, we give them responses to their reading. And then we ask them to categorize the pros and cons of going to Jordan. Okay? Or is this is Vietnam, sorry. Going to Vietnam. And so they need to identify pros and cons, or not related, or wrong information, and then we give them feedback on it. Because they can't really write a summary. If you can't write an accurate summary if you don't have the right information, right? We'd be penalizing them twice on the test. So we want to see if they can learn from what they didn't know on this part. Then what we do is we give them a skill where we help them categorize this into pros and cons, not related, and wrong information. After that, we actually teach them, do teach them to write summaries, and I don't think I put that on here. But we teach them, we give them a little bit of assistance in how to write summaries, because at the B1 level, we don't assume they know how to do that. Okay? And then we ask them finally to write your email summary here. This is the first thing that's scored for a performance score. We repeat the same thing in the listening. So in the listening, first the teacher, she introduces the task. Then the students chat and figure out what the task is. Then there are some listenings. There are, I think, 4 listenings. It's all about Jordan. They have to answer questions on that. And then we ask them, so these are the questions. And then we have them categorize the pros and cons of going to Jordan, just like they did with Vietnam. We give them answers again. And then, if you hover over the answer, it tells you, we wanted to make this very simple in its first version, it tells you why you got it wrong. And then the students chat again, okay, this time they chat about, well, where are they going to go? We need to write a synthesis, how are we going to do this? Which trick should we choose here, okay? So there's a synthesis task, which is not scored. And then they get all of the information here, and then they need to decide which one, based on all the criteria of both of them, they need to decide which one to go to, okay? And there's no right answer, of course. And then they need to give us their narration here by clicking on that little thing over there. Okay. And then the teacher comes back and says, okay, well, thanks for doing that part of the test, but let's give you the background knowledge test again. And we give them the background knowledge test to see if they've learned something. Okay. So, and that's the end of the test. So what did we measure here? And this is basically my last slide. So in this test, the students were able to measure the display of domain-related topical language knowledge prior to and after the scenario. The pre- and post-test scenario assessment can be used to assess development of topical and language development across the scenario. So they should learn something about this as they go across the scenario. We can also measure the display of topical and language performance during the test. So we can actually get a writing sample, we can measure reading, listening, speaking, and writing. And we have 2 writing samples. We've given them those tasks where we ask them to categorize. So in 4, we have the display of those foundational, my Italian hands, right? The foundational knowledge, skills, and abilities. So think of it this way, if they can't do the categorization, they really can't write the summary. So with this information, we can then help them fix it. Do you understand? We know where in the process they go off on, because it's good formative information. And then finally, we get the display of topical and language performance after we've given them corrective feedback and assistance provided. To look at, we can give them what's called an assisted performance score. So final thoughts here? Do I have time for final thoughts? Okay, I'm done. Thank you. Here, I got this. There we go.